One of the biggest mistakes in sports history was made that night on live television to a 73-year-old man. And just 30 seconds later, silence spoke louder than all the profanity. The Mandalay Bay Arena in the heart of Las Vegas was vibrating with electrical energy that Saturday night. The 18,000-seat venue was packed to capacity, with voices rising from every corner, turning the arena into a veritable cauldron. This wasn't just an ordinary boxing night. The evening when Danny "Lightning" Rodriguez would defend his title was about to become one of the most unforgettable moments in sports history. Danny Rodriguez was 28 years old with a perfect 32-0 record. This young boxer, the light heavyweight world champion, had become one of the brightest stars in the sports world over the past 3 years. When he entered the ring with his muscular 6 feet 1 inch frame, the ending was almost always the same for his opponents: knockout. But Danny's real power wasn't in his fists, it was in his tongue. This boxer, with 5 million social media followers, had mastered the art of mentally defeating his opponents before fights with his pre-fight talk. Every pre-fight press conference had become a show for him. Profanity, humiliation, and insulting words had become Danny's signature. That night, he faced Mexican veteran Carlos "El Matador" Mendez. The 38-year-old Mendez was approaching the end of his career but was still a respected fighter. The experienced boxer, with 45 wins and 12 losses, was trying to seize his last chance against Danny. However, hours before the fight began, Danny's real target wasn't Carlos. In videos he shared on his social media accounts, he was making comments about the celebrity guests who would be sitting ringside. His Instagram live streams had become increasingly provocative, each one designed to generate maximum controversy and engagement. "Some old legends are supposed to come tonight," he laughed into the camera, his gold teeth glinting under the dressing room lights. "Maybe they'll learn a few moves from me. That is, if they don't fall asleep during the first round." The comments section exploded with fire emojis and laughing faces. His young fan base ate up every word, feeding his already inflated ego. Danny thrived on this attention, this digital validation that made him feel invincible. Danny's manager, Mike Sullivan, was a weathered man with 15 years of experience in the brutal world of professional boxing. He had repeatedly expressed his discomfort with Danny's attitude, watching his promising fighter transform from a hungry young boxer into an arrogant showman. Danny focused. "Carlos isn't an easy opponent. Drop this old man talk," he had warned earlier that week, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen promising careers destroyed by unchecked egos. But Danny wasn't listening. The intoxication that fame brought was making him more and more arrogant each passing day. Social media had created a feedback loop of praise and adoration that distorted his perception of reality. When fight night arrived, the arena began to fill up with an electric atmosphere that only Las Vegas could provide. In the VIP section, Hollywood stars, tech billionaires, and retired sports legends were taking their seats. The who's who of American celebrity culture had gathered to witness what they expected to be another dominant performance by the rising star. Right in the middle of the front row sat an elderly man, positioned modestly between 2 empty seats. He wore a simple black shirt and dark jeans, his silver hair neatly combed. His presence was understated, yet there was something about his stillness that commanded attention, a calm authority that needed no announcement. Chuck Norris, despite being 73 years old, still maintained that legendary posture that had defined his career. His back was straight but not rigid, his hands rested comfortably on his knees, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen it all. Beside him sat his old friend and security coordinator, Tom Mitchell, a former Marine who had worked with Chuck for over 2 decades. Chuck usually didn't attend such events, preferring the quiet of his Texas ranch to the spectacle of modern boxing. But tonight, he had a special reason. Part of the proceeds from this charity event would go to his Kickstart Kids Foundation, which taught martial arts and life skills to young people across America. "It's going to be a bit noisy," Tom whispered, noting the increasingly rowdy crowd around them. Chuck just smiled and nodded, his expression serene. "The energy of the young generation," he said calmly, watching as fans took selfies and live-streamed their view of the ring. After the arena filled to capacity, the warm-up matches began. The preliminary fights served their purpose, building excitement and anticipation for the main event. Danny was making his final preparations in the luxurious champion's locker room, surrounded by his entourage of trainers, promoters, and hangers-on. His trainer, Bobby Big Red Harrison, was a man with 20 years of experience who had been managing Danny's career from the very beginning. Bobby had trained 3 world champions and understood the mental game as well as the physical demands of professional boxing. "Carlos is a good counterpuncher," Bobby reminded him, wrapping Danny's hands with practiced precision. "He's been studying your tape for months. Don't be hasty. Keep your distance and go with your combinations. Don't get drawn into his rhythm." Danny nodded absently, but his mind was elsewhere. He was scrolling through his phone, reading the comments on his social media accounts. His fans were sending him support messages, but many were also feeding his ego with expectations of dominance. I heard those old actors are there two-faced with tears of joy. Lightning should teach them a lesson. Two flexed biceps. Show these has-beens what real fighting looks like. Fire. Danny grinned at these comments. The validation felt intoxicating, reinforcing his belief that he was untouchable, that his youth and modern training methods made him superior to anyone from previous generations. At 10:30, preparations for the main event began with typical Las Vegas pageantry. First, Carlos entered the ring to a respectful but modest reception. The Mexican fighter was known for his dignity, his workmanlike approach to boxing, and his reputation for never backing down. He crossed himself as he entered the ring, a quiet prayer for strength and safety. Then the lights dimmed and Danny's entrance music began to play. The hip-hop beat thundered through the arena's sound system, accompanied by pyrotechnics and laser lights. The crowd went wild as Danny emerged from the tunnel, his entourage surrounding him like a presidential motorcade. As Danny walked toward the ring, he raised his hands in the air, making elaborate gestures to the spectators. His golden shorts caught the lights, and his bright blue boxing gloves looked like weapons of war. With his sculpted physique and confident swagger, he looked less like a boxer and more like a Hollywood action star. When he entered the ring, he immediately requested the microphone from the ring announcer. This was Danny's traditional ritual, his moment to control the narrative before the actual fighting began. He had turned pre-fight showmanship into an art form, understanding that in modern boxing, entertainment value often mattered as much as athletic ability. Las Vegas, he shouted into the microphone, his voice echoing through the arena's speakers. Tonight you'll witness history. Lightning Rodriguez will strike like lightning once again. The audience gave mixed reactions. His younger fans erupted in cheers, while older boxing purists showed their disapproval with scattered boos. The division in the crowd reflected the changing nature of professional boxing itself. Danny continued his theatrical display, bouncing around the ring with exaggerated energy. His eyes scanned the VIP section, where cameras were capturing every moment for social media and television broadcasts. And tonight we have some special guests, he continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone. His eyes stopped on Chuck Norris, and a calculated smirk spread across his face. Look over there. Chuck Norris, the legend himself, is here. The cameras immediately panned to Chuck, who calmly acknowledged the attention with a modest wave. The audience stood up in respectful applause, recognizing a genuine icon from an earlier era of American entertainment and martial arts. Danny's smile widened, but there was nothing friendly about it. Chuck Norris, Hollywood's action hero. But Chuck, this is real life, not a movie set. No stunt doubles, no special effects. This was the first warning sign that something was about to go very wrong. Tom tensed up beside Chuck, his protective instincts activated. What the hell is this kid doing? He muttered under his breath. Chuck remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. He simply watched Danny with the patient attention of someone observing a student who was about to learn a difficult lesson. Danny, emboldened by the crowd's mixed reaction, continued his verbal assault. Maybe you were intimidating back in the 1980s, Chuck, but welcome to 2024. We have science now, sports medicine, advanced training methods. Age catches up with everyone. A wave of uncomfortable murmurs swept through the arena. Many spectators who had come to enjoy a boxing match were now witnessing something that felt more like a public humiliation. Danny's words carried a cruelty that went beyond typical pre-fight bravado. Danny, cut it out, shouted Bobby from his corner, his face red with embarrassment and anger. Focus on the damn fight. But Danny was beyond listening now. The adrenaline, the lights, the cameras, and his own inflated sense of invincibility had created a perfect storm of arrogance. He was high on his own perceived power, drunk on the attention. You know what, Chuck? Danny said, his voice rising with mock excitement. If you think you've still got it, this ring is open to you too. But I seriously doubt an old-timer like you has the guts to step in here with a real fighter. The arena fell into complete silence. 18,000 people collectively held their breath. Even Danny's most devoted fans seemed shocked by the level of disrespect being displayed. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was character assassination. Chuck Norris slowly stood up. The movement was subtle, but somehow it commanded the attention of every person in the arena. As he rose to his full height, the silence became even more profound. Here was a man who had earned his reputation through decades of disciplined training, real competition, and quiet demonstration of skill. Tom started to stand as well, but Chuck placed a gentle hand on his friend's arm, a signal to remain calm. There was no anger in Chuck's eyes, no visible reaction to the insults. Instead, there was something far more powerful, absolute certainty. Young man, Chuck said, his his voice clear and steady, carrying easily across the hushed arena without amplification. Respect isn't earned through words, it's demonstrated through action. Danny's grin faltered for just a moment before returning even wider. The brief hesitation revealed that somewhere beneath his bravado, he recognized he might be treading on dangerous ground. "Oh, we're getting philosophical now," Danny laughed, playing to his section of the crowd. "Speaking of age, Chuck, how old are you exactly? 75? 80? Maybe it's time someone told you that your 15 minutes ended decades ago." The insult hung in the air like a challenge that could not be ignored. Chuck turned to Tom and whispered something brief. Tom nodded gravely and stood up. "Mr. Rodriguez," Tom said, his voice projecting with military precision. "Mr. Norris would like to know if the commission and organizers would approve a brief, friendly exhibition. 1 minute, just to show there are no hard feelings." The arena exploded. Fans jumped to their feet, phones emerged from pockets, and the energy shifted from uncomfortable tension to electric anticipation. Was this really happening? Was Chuck Norris, at 73 years old, actually accepting a challenge from a world champion boxer in his prime? Danny was momentarily stunned. He had expected either silence or angry words, not an actual acceptance of his taunts. But his shock quickly transformed into excitement. This was going to be the biggest viral moment of his career. "Are you serious, old man?" Danny said, his voice cracking slightly with a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. "You're actually going to risk your reputation at your age." Chuck began walking toward the ring with measured steps. Each movement reflected decades of disciplined training. There was no showmanship, no dramatic gestures, just purposeful motion. When he reached the ring steps, he paused for just a moment, looking up at Danny with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent mastering his craft. As Chuck climbed through the ropes, the arena's atmosphere shifted completely. This was no longer a boxing match or a publicity stunt. Something profound was about to unfold, a collision between two completely different philosophies of strength, respect, and what it meant to be a true martial artist. The boxing commission officials and referees huddled in emergency consultation. They had protocols for unusual situations, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for this moment. After heated discussion, they decided to allow a 1-minute exhibition match, with strict instructions that it remain friendly and controlled. Gloves were brought for Chuck, though he politely declined headgear. Danny remained in his corner, receiving frantic last-minute advice from Bobby, who looked like a man watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. "Danny, listen to me very carefully," Bobby said, gripping his fighter's shoulders. "This man is not what you think he is. He's not just some actor. He was a legitimate world champion martial artist. Show some respect and don't try to hurt him." Danny nodded, but the arrogant sparkle remained in his eyes. "Relax, Bobby. I'm not going to seriously hurt the old man. I'll just give him something to remember, maybe teach him to stay in his lane." The referee, a seasoned official named Martinez, brought both men to the center of the ring. The contrast was stark. Danny, young and muscular, bouncing with nervous energy. Chuck, calm and centered, his feet planted firmly on the canvas. "Gentlemen," Martinez said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had officiated hundreds of professional fights. "This is supposed to be a friendly exhibition. I want clean technique, mutual respect, and no one gets hurt. Touch gloves and show some sportsmanship." Danny extended his gloves with exaggerated ceremony. "No hard feelings, Chuck. I just want to see if those movie moves work in real life." Chuck touched gloves briefly, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Respect is earned, young man. Tonight, you might learn what that means." The bell rang. Danny immediately exploded into action, just as he had in dozens of previous fights. He threw a lightning-fast combination. Jab, cross, left hook, all delivered with championship-level speed and precision. These were the same punches that had knocked out his last 3 opponents. But Chuck wasn't there. The evasion wasn't dramatic or showy. Chuck simply shifted his weight, adjusted his position by mere inches, and Danny's carefully aimed strikes found nothing but air. It was like trying to punch smoke. "What the hell?" Danny muttered, momentarily confused by the complete ineffectiveness of his attack. Chuck didn't counterattack. He didn't even seem to be exerting himself. He just reset his position, hands at a comfortable guard, feet perfectly balanced, waiting with infinite patience. Danny pressed forward more aggressively, throwing a more complex combination. Double jab, right cross, left uppercut, right hook. Each punch was thrown with serious intent, the kind of power that could end a fight. But again, none of them connected. Chuck seemed to anticipate each attack before it was fully formed, responding with minimal movement that made maximum efficiency. The crowd watched in stunned silence. They were witnessing something that defied their understanding of how fighting worked. A 73-year-old man was making a world champion boxer look like an amateur, and he wasn't even breathing hard. 30 seconds had passed, and Danny hadn't landed a single clean shot. His confidence was beginning to crack, replaced by frustration and a growing sense that he had made a terrible miscalculation. "Stand still and fight," he shouted, his voice carrying a note of desperation. Chuck spoke for the first time since the exhibition began. "Fighting isn't about standing still, son. It's about being where you need to be when you need to be there." The calm wisdom in Chuck's voice only made Danny angrier. He abandoned all pretense of technique and began throwing wild, power-driven punches, hoping that sheer aggression would overwhelm whatever defensive magic Chuck was employing. But Chuck continued to move like water, flowing around Danny's attacks with such ease that it seemed choreographed. Every wild swing, every desperate combination found only empty space. At the 45-second mark, Chuck finally moved offensively. It wasn't a punch or a kick or any dramatic technique. He simply stepped forward when Danny overcommitted to a right cross and placed his palm gently against Danny's chest. The contact lasted perhaps a tenth of a second, but Danny staggered backward as if he had been hit by a freight train. The strike hadn't looked like much to the audience, but Danny felt as though every ounce of air had been driven from his lungs. "How did you?" Danny gasped, his eyes wide with shock and dawning respect. Chuck smiled slightly. "Timing, son, and 50 years of practice." With 10 seconds remaining, Danny made one final desperate attempt. He lunged forward with everything he had left, throwing a haymaker that carried all his remaining strength and pride. Chuck caught Danny's wrist mid-swing and applied the gentlest possible pressure, redirecting the young man's momentum until Danny found himself sitting on the canvas, completely unharmed but thoroughly dominated. The bell rang, ending the exhibition. The arena erupted in applause, but it wasn't the bloodthirsty roar that typically followed a knockout. This was something deeper: appreciation for a demonstration of mastery, respect for a lesson publicly taught and received. Danny sat on the canvas for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. In 60 seconds, everything he thought he knew about fighting, about strength, about what made someone formidable, had been completely redefined. Chuck extended his hand to help Danny up. "Stand up, son. The lesson isn't over yet." Danny took the offered hand and rose to his feet. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by something he had never experienced before: genuine humility in the face of superior skill. "I don't understand," Danny said quietly, his voice barely audible over the crowd's continued applause. "How did you do that? I couldn't touch you." Chuck placed his hand on Danny's shoulder with fatherly gentleness. "You were fighting my reputation, my age, your own expectations. You weren't fighting me. Real combat isn't about power or speed or youth. It's about understanding. Understanding yourself, understanding your opponent, understanding the moment." The two men stood together in the center of the ring, teacher and student, in an impromptu classroom that held 18,000 witnesses. The transformation in Danny was visible to everyone present. The cocky young champion had encountered something he had never faced before: authentic mastery. The post-fight interviews were unlike anything in boxing history. Danny, still visibly shaken by the experience, spoke with a humility that shocked everyone who knew him. "I learned something tonight that no amount of training could have taught me," he said into the microphones. "Chuck Norris showed me the difference between being a fighter and being a martial artist. I apologize to him, to everyone watching, and to everyone I've disrespected with my attitude." Chuck declined most interview requests, but he did issue a brief statement through Tom. "Tonight wasn't about winning or losing. It was about passing on knowledge. Every generation has something to teach the next and something to learn from them. Respect flows both ways." The video footage from that night became one of the most watched sports clips in internet history. But more importantly, it marked the beginning of a genuine transformation in Danny Rodriguez. In the months that followed, Danny's entire approach to boxing changed. He trained harder, spoke more thoughtfully, and began studying traditional martial arts alongside his boxing technique. He reached out to Chuck privately, beginning a mentorship that would define the rest of his career. A year later, in what would become his final interview about that night, Danny reflected on the experience. "Chuck Norris taught me that real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. True power is quiet, confident, and controlled. That night, I learned the difference between being famous and being respected." Chuck Norris, in his characteristically humble way, never spoke publicly about the incident again. But those who knew him well understood that he took no pleasure in having to teach such a lesson. He had simply done what master teachers do: recognized a teachable moment and acted upon it with wisdom and restraint. The 30 seconds that night became legendary not because of the spectacle, but because of the transformation they represented. In an age of social media showboating and manufactured controversy, an elderly master had demonstrated that authentic skill, true confidence, and quiet dignity would always triumph over noise and arrogance. Years later, martial arts schools around the world would use footage from that exhibition to teach their students about respect, humility, and the true meaning of martial arts mastery. The lesson wasn't about age defeating youth, but about wisdom guiding ignorance toward understanding. Danny Rodriguez went on to have a distinguished career, but he never forgot the night he learned that true champions are made not just in the gym, but in moments of character-defining choice. He established his own foundation for at-risk youth, teaching them that real strength comes from discipline, respect, and the courage to admit when you're wrong. Chuck Norris returned to his quiet life in Texas, content in the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are fought not to defeat an opponent, but to save them from their own worst instincts. He had turned what could have been a moment of public humiliation into an opportunity for genuine growth. The 30 seconds that shocked the world became a testament to a simple truth. Authentic power doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes the most profound victories are achieved not through dominance, but through the patient demonstration of what true mastery looks like. In an age of manufactured drama and instant gratification, Chuck Norris had reminded everyone watching that some lessons can only be learned through direct experience, and that the greatest teachers are often those who lead by example rather than by words. Real power, as millions discovered that night, sometimes emerges in complete silence, and sometimes reveals itself in just 30 unforgettable seconds.